I thought I knew betrayal, until I walked into my own bedroom and found my wife wrapped in another man's arms. That night changed everything, and led me down a path I never saw coming. The night was eerily quiet, not a single sound breaking the stillness. The pale moon hung high, indifferent, casting its cold light over the dark, silent world below. I parked my car a street away, not wanting to wake any curious neighbors with the engine noise. After all, it was late and the last thing I needed was unnecessary attention. I approached the gate, relieved once more that I'd taken the time to oil the hinges. The latch moved smoothly and I slipped inside without a sound. The path leading to the front porch was tiled, thankfully not gravel, so my footsteps remained silent. I felt almost like a ninja, moving stealthily through the dimness. At the entrance, I quickly disabled the alarm 034 and inserted my key into the lock. The soft click signaled that the door was open, and I stepped into the spacious hall. The cool air inside hit me, and I figured Vera must have switched on the air conditioner for the night. I took a moment to glance around. Empty. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock. Quietly, I made my way to the staircase, careful not to let the steps creak beneath my feet. The corridor upstairs was dark, faintly illuminated by the moonlight streaming through the window. As I moved closer to our bedroom, I noticed a thin sliver of light seeping through the slightly open door. My heart pounded as I crept closer, straining to listen. Someone was snoring inside. It struck me as odd. Since when did Vera start snoring like that? Realization dawned on me slowly. Besides Vera, someone else was in the room. I pushed the door open a bit more, trying not to make a sound. The hinges gave a faint groan, but neither of the figures on the bed stirred. The scene before me could have been straight out of a painting, if it weren't for the context. There they were, wrapped in each other's arms, sprawled out on the marital bed. Vera's tousled head rested on the man's hairy chest, a blissful smile playing on her lips. For a moment I just stood there trying to process it all. My wife, asleep next to a stranger, a muscular, hairy man, like some kind of pastoral scene gone wrong. I could almost picture it as a painting, if only it wasn't my life. After a few seconds I walked over to the bed and transferred the gun to my left hand. Gently I scratched the guy's furry chest with my right hand. His eyes fluttered open and confusion filled his face. As he started to sit up, Vera's head rolled off his chest, hitting the mattress. I didn't hesitate, I landed a solid punch on his jaw. The impact sent him backward and he was out cold, collapsing back onto the bed without a sound. Vera jerked awake, disoriented at first, but it didn't take long for fear to fill her eyes. "George, it's not what you think," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Really?" I replied, raising an eyebrow. "Because it sure looks like exactly what I think. You in our bed with this hairy guy." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. I shook my head, trying to grasp how we had ended up here, how she had ended up here. A cold, bitter laugh escaped me, and Vera shivered at the sight of my smirk. I couldn't help it, it was just too absurd. "What happened? Did you trip and accidentally fall on a bar of soap? Or was it something else? Go ahead, enlighten me," I taunted. But Vera remained silent, clearly unable to muster up any excuse that would sound even remotely believable. I sighed, almost pitying her. Poor thing. The guy lying next to her looked like he could be selling watermelons at the Central Market. A rough, burly type from some sunny southern place. Had Vera really sunk this low? Was she so desperate that she didn't care who she brought into our bed? Did she just grab the first man she found? She wasn't some naive young girl, experiencing a man's touch for the first time. No, she was a grown woman, a 34-year-old who had been through thick and thin with me. A mother, no less. How could she have let herself get to this point? My thoughts swarmed like angry wasps, buzzing around my head, leaving me with just one clear path forward. "It's my decision to make," I said, locking eyes with my father-in-law, standing there speechless. "I'm not afraid of prison. People live there too and I'll manage just fine. As for your company, I've already handed in my resignation to HR. I moved out of the house, so Vera can go ahead and invite the whole gang of your partners over if she likes." The old man clearly hadn't expected such defiance. He gasped, his mouth hanging open, struggling to find the right words. I'd aimed for that exact reaction, knocking the wind right out of him. I left the office, making sure to slam the door behind me. It felt strangely satisfying, like I was finally putting an end to this chapter. My mind was already spinning with plans to leave this city, to start fresh somewhere far from this mess. I pulled out my phone, dialing a number that had been etched into my memory. A voice on the other end, unfamiliar, answered with a gruff, "You're on the line." Trying to keep my voice even without revealing the storm brewing inside me, I replied, "I'm calling about a job. Uncle Maxim said I could reach out through this number." There was a brief pause, then the man spoke again, his tone neutral. "Sorry, we've got nothing open right now. We already hired someone back in June." Disappointment settled over me, but I tried not to let it show. I needed a distraction, a new place to clear my head. That's how I found myself at the Wild Duck Cafe, a place that felt like stepping into another world, one filled with tough guys and hearty meals. I looked around the dining hall, taking in the unique atmosphere. On the walls hung time-worn electric guitars, displayed in frames under glass, bathed in soft fluorescent light. At the far end stood an old Harley on a small stage, marking the place as a biker haven. Between the guitars, animal antlers from past hunts hung proudly, adding a rugged touch to the place. My thoughts were interrupted when one of the fight participants crashed into my table, nearly knocking over my drink. I shot him a glare, but he barely seemed to notice, too caught up in his own brawl. The Wild Duck Cafe really did live up to its name, chaotic, unpredictable, and full of life. I barely managed to jump back, still clutching my plate of seafood salad, as the guy who had been knocked down struggled to his feet, gripping the table legs for support. Just then, an empty bottle smashed against his head, and he slumped to the floor, motionless. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone else rushing toward me, clearly aiming to involve me in the chaos. It looked like I was about to get dragged into the whirlwind of the brawl. Well, I figured I might as well let off some steam. Before he could land a hit, I sidestepped and tripped the charging fool, sending him sprawling. Not every idiot who thinks they can pick a fight ends up on their feet. You know, it's funny how life turns out. Growing up, I was the only child in my family, but I wasn't spoiled like you might expect. My parents raised me like any other kid, kindergarten, school, and eventually my first love, playing guitar in the alleyways. Later, I even went to music school thanks to my dad who funded my lessons. I took it seriously, determined to make his money count. After I finished school, I made a decision that surprised a lot of people. I joined the army. My friends didn't get it, and their mothers were practically in shock. They couldn't understand why I'd choose such a tough path. But I wanted to prove something to myself, to see if I had what it took. One memory from that time still sticks with me. During a mission, our commander got hit, and I found myself crawling toward a small forest on the slope, hoping to find cover. Just before I reached the bushes, something made me turn around. I saw him there, groaning and barely conscious. Without thinking, I went back, lifted him as best I could, and dragged him to safety. It took 2 long, grueling days, but we finally made it back to our unit. The commander survived. When I visited him in the hospital later, he looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you'd left me behind," he said. I felt my face heat up with guilt, because honestly I almost had. I didn't hide the truth from the military investigator, admitting that for a moment, I had thought about saving just myself. But I couldn't live with that choice. After the army, life moved on. I didn't really make close friends, mostly just acquaintances. Many of the people I knew from college came from wealthy families, destined for comfortable careers without much effort. Their futures were practically laid out for them. I, on the other hand, knew that at best, I'd end up as a foreman or maybe a workshop manager at a factory. It wasn't much, but it was something. Still, I pushed myself academically, always hungry to learn more. Early autumn rolled in, warm enough that it felt like summer was reluctant to let go. I found myself back at the Wild Duck Cafe, ordering another round of vodka and beer. I asked the waitress about the shashlik I'd ordered earlier and then wiped my mouth with a napkin before stepping outside for some air. As I reached the street, I saw a disturbing scene unfolding. A group of guys had almost succeeded in dragging a young woman into a car. She was sobbing loudly, desperately clinging to the hope that someone would come to her rescue. My heart pounded with adrenaline as I took in the situation. I knew I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. I approached the restless tough guy, tapping him on the shoulder. He turned around, visibly annoyed, but before he could react, I struck him right between the eyes with my knuckles. A precise, calculated hit. If done correctly, it's a move that never fails, and sure enough, the guy dropped like a stone, collapsing silently at my feet. A little later, I found myself at my mother's place. As soon as she saw her eldest grandson, something changed in her expression. She looked at me strangely but didn't say a word, and I didn't bother asking. I was too caught up in my own thoughts, my mind clouded with love for my wife. Back then, nothing else seemed to matter. Time moved forward mercilessly, as it always does. 8 years slipped by, and then our second son was born. I could hardly contain my happiness. An amazing, loving wife and 2 wonderful boys. It felt like life had finally given me everything I could ever want. All that was left was to build a house, and just a year later we did. Throughout that time I kept working at her father's company. I took pride in supporting my family, knowing I was doing my part. Life seemed perfect, at least on the surface. One morning the phone rang unexpectedly. The voice on the other end informed me that a vacancy had opened up and that they'd sent the details to my site. "Have a good day," the caller said before hanging up. I just stared at the phone for a moment, trying to process the information, then carefully set it on the nightstand. I moved to the desk and powered on the computer. On my site, I found a brief description of the new job and contact numbers for further inquiries. I considered calling right away but hesitated, as if something was holding me back. I sat there, gathering my thoughts before finally heading to the bathroom. To my surprise, the light flickered briefly before steadying. I shrugged it off, grabbed a rough waffle towel and decided to shave. The thought of the inevitable morning routine didn't do much for my mood. As I ran the razor over my cheeks, it moved smoothly, like a skier gliding over a rough slope, leaving a clean path through the soapy foam. After a few minutes, only small bits of foam remained, which I washed away with cold water. Staring back at me in the mirror was a man who wasn't exactly old but whose temples had started to gray. I splashed some Arabian cologne on my face, letting the sharp scent wake me up, and then headed to the small kitchen. Pouring myself a cup of coffee, I couldn't help but think about how much my life had changed. My thoughts were still swirling when I decided to clear my head by visiting the art gallery. The place had an air of refinement, as you'd expect from a space dedicated to high art. The hall was small but packed with paintings of various sizes, alongside bronze and marble sculptures. I wasn't an art expert, but even I could tell that these masterpieces must have cost a fortune. As I was taking in the surroundings, a cheerful young woman appeared from behind a large sculpture, smiling brightly. "Are you looking for something exclusive, or would you just like to browse?" she asked, her voice warm and welcoming. "I'd like to see Maxim Anatolyevich," I replied, keeping my tone polite but direct. The atmosphere shifted for a moment before she nodded and gestured for me to wait. As I stood there, silence settled around me. Eventually my father-in-law appeared, his face serious. Without a word, he scribbled a 5-digit number on a napkin and slid it toward me. "Will this amount satisfy you?" he asked, pushing the napkin closer. I glanced at the number, a hefty sum no doubt. I picked it up, considering his offer carefully. He was buying silence, but I wasn't sure if money could really fix what was broken. I took a deep breath and looked at him squarely. "I think you've got the wrong idea about me," I said, pushing the napkin with the number back across the table. "All I want is a divorce. The rest is your family business, not mine. I'm not interested in your money, and I'm not going to spread stories about the divorce. Your daughter can sleep easy." My words hung in the air, and I realized they might have sounded more cryptic than I intended. The old man didn't seem satisfied. He leaned forward and added, "That's not enough. You also need to leave the city." His demand didn't surprise me. I had already guessed that cutting ties with Vera wouldn't be enough for him. He needed me out of the picture entirely. Back when I was still in the military, there was an operation that stuck with me. We had a straightforward mission: move in, secure the island, and get out before things got heated. We weren't acting alone. The plan was for the locals to support us the moment paratroopers from the neighboring country started landing. Our goal was to occupy the presidential palace without unnecessary bloodshed. It went off without a hitch. The country was small, with minimal armed forces and police. We took over the palace without firing a single shot. The guards didn't even resist. It almost felt surreal, like we were walking through a movie scene. When the mission wrapped up, I couldn't help but think how effortlessly it all went down. No casualties, no real danger. Just a clean operation with minimal fallout. Fast forward to the courthouse years later, where I found myself standing across from Vera. The divorce was final. As we walked out, I caught a glimpse of her face, eyes downcast, tears welling up. I couldn't help but ask, "Vera, are you ashamed?" She didn't answer, just slipped past me without a word. Watching her walk away, I couldn't help but wonder how her life would turn out. Would she settle down with that Italian playboy she'd been seeing? It didn't really matter now. But I knew one thing: trying to convince her new man that she was done with cheating would be an uphill battle. A thought struck me: women are like time. Sometimes they linger, sometimes they leave, and sometimes you just don't know how to deal with them. It wasn't long before things took a darker turn. One night, a man I didn't recognize came at me with a knife. We fought, and when it was over, I wiped the blade clean on his clothes, realizing the truth: my father-in-law wasn't bluffing. He couldn't force me out of the city, so he decided to hire a hitman. Unfortunately for him, I wasn't as easy to take down as he thought. Bad luck. though I wasn't sure if it was worse for the old man or the assassin now lying motionless at my feet. I knew then that staying in the city wasn't an option anymore. Revenge could wait. First, I needed to lie low and vanish from everyone's radar. I found refuge in a small cabin, tucked away in the woods. It was simple but functional, a temporary home. The cabin had sturdy wooden walls made from unhewn logs and an unpainted wooden floor. Near the window stood a long oak table with a wide bench. Against the opposite wall, there was a large bunk covered in a wolf's skin. Above it hung a deer's skin and a few darkened medallions adorned with antlers. In the corner, a cast-iron stove crackled warmly, filling the cabin with a pleasant scent of burning wood. Despite the warmth, the cold air outside remained biting, but the cabin itself was cozy. Even the usually noisy magpies were nowhere to be seen, as if nature itself had quieted down, giving me a rare moment of peace. I knew I couldn't stay there indefinitely, but for now it was the safest place I could find, a place to think and figure out my next move. I stood on the porch, warming my hands with a steaming cup of coffee. The stillness around me was almost surreal. It felt like I could hear the steam itself rising from the vivid red mug. I took a slow sip, savoring the taste, and then looked up at the night sky. The constellations above seemed as random and meaningless as ever. Maybe I'd finally accepted defeat, or at least it felt that way. But was it really a loss to shed the burdens I'd been carrying for so long? Maybe I should have let go much earlier. I took another deep breath, the crisp air filling my lungs, and headed back inside. Elsewhere, in a more polished part of the world, a man adjusted the knot of his silk tie, making sure it was perfectly centered between the tips of his shirt collar. The tie alone was worth $7,500, a small fortune for most, but just another accessory for him. His shoes, sleek and elegant, cost about $1,000 per pair. Despite his wealth, he wasn't one to waste or let his fine attire get dirty. Stepping carefully, he avoided mud splatters that might stain his expensive black cashmere coat. A security guard, dressed in crisp new camouflage, respectfully held the glass door open for him. The man couldn't help but glance at his reflection to ensure everything was immaculate before stepping out. Inside, his assistant was already preparing the usual, coffee brewed from beans that had passed through the digestive system of a civet, a cat-like creature from Indonesia. Known as kopi luwak, this coffee could range from $100 to $500 per pound, depending on availability. The beans were painstakingly collected from the animal's droppings, processed and imported. The result was an exquisite coffee, reserved only for his closest friends. The assistant carefully placed the tray on the polished table, alongside the morning newspapers from Cape Town. She hesitated for a moment, her bright blue eyes lingering on her boss, waiting for further instructions. In another room, the conversation took a more adventurous turn. Loren, visibly curious, laid several color photographs in front of Jurgen. The images appeared to show something massive in the water, a creature that looked suspiciously like a megalodon, an ancient shark long believed to be extinct. "Are these real?" Jurgen asked, squinting at the images. "I had our experts verify them," Loren replied, shifting in his seat. "They're legit, no signs of Photoshop or tampering." Jurgen took a deep breath, his mind racing. "If I agree to this expedition, I'll need a capable crew. Specialists. Most importantly, people I can trust." Loren nodded. "We've already assembled a team, Baron, Moose, and Document. You're the fourth. Uncle Maxim will handle the logistics." "When's the flight?" Jurgen asked. "Tomorrow," Loren replied. "You'll fly through Kazakhstan, then Istanbul, and from there to Cape Town. Uncle Maxim insisted you don't pack anything. You'll get all your gear on arrival. Oh, and leave your gun behind." The car door slammed shut, and the vehicle slowly turned around, disappearing behind the trees. Jurgen remained on the porch, his mind teeming with thoughts of the unknown, excitement stirring within him. I stood there for a while, lost in thought, before finally going back inside. My mind wandered to another story I knew well, the life of Jurgen. Jurgen had married young, but tragedy struck when his wife passed away, leaving him a single father. Grief consumed him, but he poured his energy into work and raising his daughter. To help manage the household, he hired a nanny who took care of both the child and the daily chores. Later, his mother-in-law arrived and naturally took charge of Charlotte, the name Jurgen had given his daughter. Jurgen never remarried, convinced that no woman would want to take on the responsibility of someone else's child. Plus, he feared that bringing a new woman into their lives might emotionally scar Charlotte. As time went on, his dedication and relentless work ethic paid off, and Jurgen built an impressive steel empire, valued at billions. Time flew by and Charlotte grew into a stunning young woman. Dressed in a sleek outfit that was completed with high-heeled Gucci shoes, she gave herself one last glance in the mirror before stepping out. It was time to make her entrance. The grand hall was already bustling with guests gathered around tables adorned with bottles of whiskey, grappa, cognac, and vodka. Waiters in white tuxedos moved gracefully among the crowd, always arriving just in time to refresh a drink. Charlotte couldn't help but notice the vodka. She didn't recall any of her father's friends being vodka drinkers. As she navigated through the hall, a man named George approached, his gaze lingering on her. "Are you an actress?" he asked, a playful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You have a very expressive face. And not just the face," he added, hinting at something more. Charlotte met his flirty tone without hesitation. "Maybe I am," she replied, enjoying the game. George wasn't the type to be easily flustered though. He poured her another glass of wine, showering her with a few more compliments. Eventually they made their way to the dance floor. As they swayed to the music, Charlotte pressed herself against George's muscular frame, and his hands slipped below her waist. It was as if no one else existed around them, and in truth, nobody seemed to pay them any mind. They were caught up in their own little world, oblivious to the other guests. Eventually Charlotte looked up at him, her eyes glancing meaningfully at the clock. "Will we see each other again?" she asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Hug me," he replied softly. It followed the usual routine, hugs and kisses, but I carefully untangled myself from her embrace. "Let's meet at the Vale Club tonight. Everyone knows it here. How about 7 in the evening, will you come?" Charlotte nodded, clearly pleased. "I'll be there," I promised, eager to leave. I quickly got dressed and tossed the room key onto the table. "Leave it at the reception when you go," I added before making my way out. As the evening approached, I headed to the Vale Club, but something seemed off. The heavy beat of the music was audible from down the street, and the neon sign glowed brightly. When I reached the entrance, I saw a sign that read, "Closed for a private event." I frowned, wondering if I'd made a mistake. A massive bouncer stood guard, eyeing me with suspicion. "Do you have an invitation?" he grunted. I cursed under my breath, shrugging. Clearly, I hadn't anticipated this hurdle. I approached the bouncer, trying to keep my tone calm and casual. "Listen," I started, hoping to reason with him. "I was invited by a friend, her name's Charlotte," I explained to the bouncer, trying to sound confident. He gave me a long, skeptical look but eventually stepped aside, allowing me in. I wasn't entirely sure why, but I wasn't about to question my good fortune. Luck seemed to have turned in my favor, at least for the moment. Though truth be told, every time I walk into a bar, it's like fate decides it's fight night. It's almost become routine at this point. Sure enough, it didn't take long for trouble to find me. I spotted Charlotte, and to my surprise, she was being dragged by a brash young guy who clearly didn't understand the word "no." I approached calmly, addressing him in a low, firm voice. "Young man, the lady doesn't want to go with you." I couldn't help but feel a hint of satisfaction at how well I enunciated those words, and to my surprise, he actually understood me. Unfortunately, his response was swift, a fist shot toward my face, whistling past my nose as I dodged at the last second. My quick movement didn't go unnoticed. The guy's friends, sensing a challenge, began heading my way, clearly prepared to jump in. I couldn't help but think, well, God knows I tried to avoid a fight. But it seemed like it was going to happen regardless. Meanwhile, out at sea, we had finally reached our destination. The yacht dropped anchor near the largest island in the archipelago just before noon. Jürgen had chosen this spot for a reason. It was prime hunting ground. That morning we had scattered chunks of raw meat into the water, hoping to attract sharks. It worked. Before long, a variety of species showed up. Massive whale sharks, great whites, medium-sized blue sharks, and even a few small cat sharks. Despite the spectacle, our client's interest lay solely in one creature, the legendary megalodon, a prehistoric predator many biologists believe to be extinct. Suddenly, the water churned with movement, and Jürgen sprang into action. He positioned himself close to the surface, spear gun in hand, tracking a monstrous shadow beneath the waves. Taking careful aim, he fired. The compressed air from the spear gun exploded outward, propelling a half-meter harpoon straight into the shark's left eye. The megalodon thrashed violently, struggling to dislodge the steel shaft, but the harpoon's barbed hooks held firm, tethered to a steel cable. For a terrifying moment, the beast tried to dive deeper, dragging Jürgen with it. If he lost his grip, it would mean certain death. But Jürgen gritted his teeth, refusing to let go, determined to survive this dangerous encounter. Later back on board we spotted trouble on the horizon, pirates. Their vessel, an old junk boat, was closing in fast. The crew was visibly tense, and the sound of their shouts through the loudspeaker didn't help. They were clearly trying to intimidate us. But I wasn't about to be bullied. I took aim with the German rifle, pressing the trigger without hesitation. The gun fired almost soundlessly with barely any recoil. The shots hit their targets with deadly precision. Pirates at the bow dropped like cut grass, while the others froze in confusion, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I adjusted my aim and fired again, this time shattering the windows of their superstructure. The remaining bandits scrambled, abandoning the deck and retreating below. Chaos erupted around the single narrow ladder leading down, as the survivors pushed and shoved to escape the gunfire. The sudden turn of events had clearly rattled the pirates, and their boldness evaporated. I kept my stance steady, maintaining control while the rest of the crew assessed the damage. For now it seemed like the threat had been neutralized. I squeezed the trigger again, unleashing another burst of gunfire. Wood splinters flew as the bullets tore through the pirates' junk boat. The chaos on their deck intensified, with the remaining bandits frantically trying to duck out of sight. I kept my aim steady, making sure none of them regained their nerve. That night I found myself lying in bed, thoughts swirling in my mind. It wasn't just about the adrenaline of the fight or the fleeting rush of victory. It was something deeper, a realization that hit me hard. Despite everything, I knew that Charlotte and I were never meant to be together. There was an emptiness that couldn't be filled, even when we were close, bodies intertwined, hearts beating as one. When I finally woke up the next morning, Charlotte was already gone. I sat up slowly, rubbing my face, and headed to the lounge to make some coffee. An hour later, a car arrived to pick us up. We loaded our sparse belongings into the trunk and made our way to the airport. There Jurgen and his daughter were waiting. The moment I saw Charlotte, I couldn't help but flinch. My heart sank. I had pieced it together. She was Jurgen's daughter. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I couldn't shake the feeling of having crossed a line I shouldn't have. Back at the cabin, I stood by the small window looking out at the bleak landscape. On a bare apple tree just outside, a crow perched, its beady eyes shifting as it tried to peek inside the hut. After a few moments, it cawed one last time, then took off, lazily flapping its wings toward the forest. I splashed some cold water on my face from the old copper basin and ran a hand over my chin. The stubble was still manageable. I figured I could put off shaving until tomorrow. Trying to clear my head, I put a frying pan on the stove, tossed in a few slices of bacon, and waited as the fat started to sizzle and pop. The comforting aroma filled the small room, easing the tension in my shoulders. Once the bacon was almost done, I cracked 3 eggs into the pan, letting them cook until the whites were set. The simple act of preparing breakfast grounded me, pulling my thoughts back from the chaos of the past few days. I couldn't help but reflect on how strange life had become. One moment I was fighting for my life, and the next I was standing in a cabin making breakfast like nothing had happened. I knew I couldn't stay off the grid forever, but for now this quiet morning was enough.